Well, it was 11 years ago. A religious education kindergarten, first grader class in a Unitarian Universalist congregation was talking about Easter. And the teacher explained that the story says that Jesus died and rose from the dead. And then asked, do you know what that means? And one first grader, who happened to be my son, said, yeah, like a zombie. And that was it. The class talked about zombies for the rest of the hour. And when the teacher told me this, I said, well, yeah, I'm sorry about that. But it was actually an opportunity to talk about the difference between being among the walking dead and practicing resurrection. She sputtered, practicing resurrection? For God's sake, we're Unitarian Universalists. And I know Easter can be complicated for us. Garrison Keillor once joked that Unitarian Universalists mostly on Easter talk about spring, buds, ducklings, lambs, maybe daffodils. And that they try very hard not to talk about you know who. And that's not too far from my own experience growing up Unitarian Universalist. And perhaps some of you may be thinking that if I didn't mention you know who, you'd be the better off for it. But here, on my first Easter with you in Geneva, I feel I would be remiss not to share my understanding of Jesus. I heard something drop. I hope everyone heard that. I said, I would be remiss not to share my understanding of Jesus. And Jesus was a Jew, likely a poor one, living under Roman rule, a second-class citizen. He was a compelling teacher. He spoke in stories and parables that gave dignity to people without power, and especially drew people who had their backs up against the walls. He emphasized inner life and community and a direct relationship with the holy. His message challenged the religious authorities of the day as he sought to reform Judaism. He was all about affirming human dignity, and for that, he was executed. His death devastated his followers. They had left everything to follow him, believing in his vision. And now he was gone, and they were afraid, scattered in grief and confusion. And then something happened. Something transformed them. These frightened, broken people became courageous, determined, alive with love. They returned to Jerusalem and began sharing Jesus' message of love, forgiveness, and grace. And over time, layers of doctrine grew around the story. And it wasn't just the teachings of Jesus, but there were teachings about Jesus. And those in power co-opted the stories and the religion and reshaped it for their own ends. But again and again, people have returned to what is essential: love, forgiveness, grace. while some people claiming to be Christian don't affirm those things as much as other things. As heirs to the transcendentalists, we here at the UU Society of Geneva believe each person carries a spark of the divine. Given the right conditions, that spark can grow. But it's easy to slip into cynicism or fear. It's easy when life becomes really hard and there's so many crazy things happening in the world, and it seems just to be becoming worse and worse, to, in a sense, join the ranks of the walking dead. My own spiritual mentor, Rob Eller Isaacs, notes, Jesus did not live and die that we might all bow down and worship him. He lived and died so that by his example, we might learn to live and die for love. The story begins when God puts on flesh and comes to walk among us. It ends, or perhaps it just begins again, when God's Spirit is uncaged by death, when the one who walked among us dies an individual and is born again as a community. And this happens time and again. Now, I grew up Unitarian Universalist without much talk of God or prayer or Jesus. The small fellowship I grew up in talked about those things except in contempt or jest. And in time, I would come to appreciate God language as language of reverence. And in time, I became not only comfortable with public prayer, but have felt compelled to pray, even though my own beliefs about God are complicated. If you ask whether I believe in God, I'll ask, what do you mean by God? And it's most likely I will reject the same God that others reject. When I first visited here in August for a worship service before beginning my ministry among you, I wasn't aware that in your liturgy, our liturgy, there's a song of praise. On one hand, I was delighted you have this tradition that you honor. And it really makes this congregation unique and distinct. And on the other hand, it was jarring, especially learning how many people affirm an atheist or agnostic viewpoint. And then there were atheists here, multiple atheists that have said, hey, we need this song of praise. It's part of who we are. And listen, it really just says what we see God, the love we all may share, the beauty everywhere, the hope of good to be, the truth that makes us free. And earlier this year, we held a gathering after one of our worship services to talk about how we wanted to go to 2 services. And the big surprise for me was one person said, couldn't we have one of the services where we don't include the song of praise? And it wasn't surprising to hear that suggestion. What was surprising was there seemed to be a fair amount of energy around that. And changing liturgy is something I won't do lightly. I want more collective conversation, us talking to one another, hearing diverse perspectives, so that if we keep it at both services, which we very well may, then those who have a hard time with it can really understand why. Or if we decide not to have it in one of the services, and together say, that's important to us, then we will know why together. Now, I don't believe in God intellectually. We have an intellectual discussion. I will never be able to affirm God. But emotionally and spiritually, I don't know how to behave as if there's not a transforming love at the center of the universe. And you know what? That doesn't make any rational sense. But that's my faith. And I don't expect you to share my faith. I expect you to listen and consider others, including mine. And I happen to have the freedom of the pulpit. But really, we also have the freedom of the pew. And is our song of praise poetry that most of us can affirm? Most of us that don't believe intellectually in God, even if you don't believe in God emotionally or spiritually either, it's something I like to talk about. But ultimately, we want to be who we are. And it's so important to me to honor tradition. And it's most important that we all are able to wake up and encourage one another to deepen in our spiritual practices, to be alive, to do things. And by the way, spiritual practices aren't only cool practices, there are warm practices as well that I see people engaging. But how do we be alive, encourage one alive, and not in time to rise one day like a zombie? Because when Marco said that, I realized children understand something important. Kids can often tell who is just going through the motions and who is truly alive. And we know what it feels like when our passion drains away, when our dreams fade, when relationships grow brittle, when anxiety makes us lash out, when meaning slips through our fingers and we begin to wonder if anything we've done has mattered. It's easy to get stuck and to become among the walking dead. And here's the hard part. Transformation is not easy. We don't awaken to new life without passing through loss, through grief, through a kind of death or literal deaths of loved ones. Our lives are not ultimately defined by what we lose, but how we come to deal with those losses, how we learn to move through those hard times, whether we awaken again with deeper compassion, deeper love, a deeper commitment to life. I love the poetry of Lynn Unger. Lynn and I were both members of the Oakland congregation when Rob Eller Isaacs was the minister there. And She has another poem I want to share today entitled Born Again. The only way to be born again is to die. The phoenix doesn't just go up in a blaze of glory. It feels the fire lick up and sizzle every feather until each quill becomes a column of flame carried straight to the core. Whatever the legend of rebirth, there is always time in the fire, or under the ground, or hanging on the cross or the tree. Don't skip over that part of the story. If you would be reborn, you have to die. But what then? After the dying, how are we to rise again into new life? The earth, the hero, the God, you and I. How does any of us find our way back from the valley of the shadow? The same way we die. Walk into the light. So may we walk into the light and rise like Jesus, rather than like zombies. The difference is awareness. Have we awakened to love, or are we moving through life half asleep? Today, many of our Christian neighbors proclaim, "He is risen." That's not quite our way. A former colleague in Cleveland told me about his marketing director saying, "Let's put it out there. Come join us on Easter. We don't know what happened." Maybe that's honest. But here's what we do know. We can choose life. We don't have to settle for what deadens us. We can attend to our inner lives, and here's the paradox, and participate in community that allows us to do so more honestly. We can participate in the beauty, the creativity, the wonder of being alive. Like the earth in spring, we can bring forth what has been dormant too long. Today, you will rise from your pew. Tomorrow, God willing, you will rise from your bed. And many days following. And the question remains, will you be among the walking dead? Or will you rise into new life, embodying love? Spring is here. This is a good time to begin again. Blessed be. Amen.
Visit us at uusg.org.